"It's just a house, give it to your sister," my parents ordered me. What they didn't know was that this house, my house, was worth 5 million pesos, and I already had a plan to teach them an unforgettable lesson. My name is Amalia, I'm 30 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I thought I had managed to build a fragile piece, a small corner of the world just for me, a sanctuary built not with bricks and mortar, but with years of silent sacrifice, sleepless nights, and constant effort that my family never bothered to acknowledge. They saw my success not as the result of my work, but as a kind of available family resource, an emergency fund to mitigate the irresponsibility of my younger sister, Kenya. The house in Coyoacan was my masterpiece, the tangible symbol of my freedom, but for them, it had become the perfect solution to Kenya's latest disaster. They didn't ask me, they demanded it. They believed that, as always, I would give in. They believed my capacity to endure was infinite, but every structure has a breaking point. And they, in their blind arrogance, had just struck mine with a sledgehammer. They didn't know that the quiet, compliant woman they had raised for 30 years was about to disappear forever. To understand the magnitude of their request, you first have to understand what that house meant to me. It wasn't a simple property in Coyoacan, it was my declaration of independence. Located on a cobblestone street in the shade of jacaranda trees that painted the sidewalk purple every spring, the house was small, barely 90 square meters, but every centimeter was mine. I found it almost by accident in a pitiful state. The paint was peeling off in flakes. Dampness had created abstract maps on the walls, and the garden was a jungle of weeds. But behind the neglect, I saw its potential. I saw the wooden beams in the ceiling, the original Talavera tiles in the kitchen, and above all, I saw a blank canvas where I could paint my own life, away from the shadows of my family's expectations. For a year, every weekend, every holiday, every extra peso went into that house. I learned to sand and varnish the wooden doors until they regained their shine. I spent hours on my knees replacing the broken patio tiles with pieces I found at flea markets. The garden, once a chaos, became my personal sanctuary. I planted lavender, rosemary, and bougainvillea that climbed the wall, creating a cascade of fuchsia and orange colors. In the center, I placed a small stone fountain whose gentle murmur was the soundtrack to my coffee-filled mornings and reading-filled nights. My work, to many, might sound unconventional. I'm a digital strategist, but my niche, my passion, is helping Mexican artisans. I build bridges between the ancestral talent of Oaxaca, Chiapas, or Michoacán and the global market. I design their online stores, tell their stories on social media, and ensure that the value of their work, of generations of knowledge, is recognized and fairly paid. My parents used to refer to my work with a condescending tone, as Amelia's little trinket business. They didn't understand that every piece of black clay pottery or every embroidered textile I helped sell was a personal victory, a way to honor my roots while forging my own path. My house was the epicenter of that universe. The living room, with its wall-to-wall bookcase, was filled with books on Mexican folk art and textiles. The dining table, a sturdy piece of wood that I restored, also served as my office, where ideas came to life. The walls were not adorned with expensive art, but with unique pieces that my artisan clients gave me in gratitude, a vibrant alebrije, a tree of life from Izúcar de Matamoros, a framed ceremonial hupel. Each object was a testament to trust and shared success. This house was not a luxury, it was a necessity. It was the only place in the world where I, Amalia, was not the responsible older sister, the sensible daughter, or the one who always understands. I was simply me. It was the physical space that represented my mental space, my autonomy. Here, I made the rules. I decided the color of the walls, the music that played, and most importantly, who crossed my threshold. That's why, when my parents, sitting in my living room drinking from ceramic cups that a potter from Puebla had made for me, told me I had to hand over the keys, they weren't just asking for a property. They were asking me to renounce my identity, to demolish my sanctuary to build another monument to my sister's incompetence on its ruins. They were asking for my soul, and that was something I was not willing to give. For you to understand why their request was the final explosion and not a simple misunderstanding, I have to open the doors to my personal museum of pain. It's a collection of grievances, of accumulated slights that I have kept locked away in my memory. The first piece in the exhibition is a comparison, the two quinceañeras. Kenya, my sister, is 4 years younger than me. Since birth, she was anointed as the princess of the house, blonde, light-eyed, and with an innate talent for drama, she monopolized all the attention. Her quinceañera was the social event of the year in our small circle. My parents, Fausto and Adela, spared no expense. They rented a hacienda on the outskirts of the city, a place with impeccable gardens and colonial ballrooms. I remember Kenya's dress, a pompous design by a local couturier that cost more than my first car. There was a live band, a 4-course banquet for 200 guests, and a candy table that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Kenya was the sun around which everyone revolved that night. I, at 19, in a simple dress my mother bought me on sale, spent my time helping, making sure the waiters attended to the older relatives, and dealing with a little cousin who had eaten too many chocolates. My role, as always, was functional, invisible. A year before, my 15th birthday was approaching. I say approaching because it never became an event. When I timidly asked my mother about plans, she sighed as if I were adding an unbearable burden to her life. "Oh, my dear," she said, reviewing bills at the kitchen table. "You know we're a little tight on money after your sister's party. Besides, you're not like her. You don't like those loud things, right? You're more intellectual." The word intellectual was her way of saying boring. My 15th birthday celebration was a dinner at home on a Saturday afternoon. My grandparents and 2 sets of aunts and uncles came. We ate mole my mother had bought pre-made and a supermarket cake. My main gift, presented with great ceremony by my father, was a used laptop. "So you can study hard, champ," he said, patting me on the back. "You're our brain, you have to make the most of it." In that moment, with a frozen smile on my face, I understood the narrative my parents had written for us. Kenya was the beauty, who deserved to be celebrated, admired, and financed. I was the intelligence, who had to be practical, responsible, and self-sufficient. Her role was to receive, mine was to provide. Her beauty was an investment that required capital. My intelligence was a tool that had to generate its own resources. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I locked myself in my room and turned on the laptop. While Kenya was hanging pictures of her dream party on her wall, I was learning to use spreadsheets to organize my homework and search for university scholarships online. I accepted my role because I knew no other option. I became the brain they wanted, not out of passion, but as a survival mechanism. I became responsible because no one else was going to be responsible for me. That night, without realizing it, I began to build the foundations of my own fortress, far away from them. The used laptop became my first tool of escape, but the memory of that humiliation, of the brutal contrast between celebration and functionality, became one of the centerpieces of my museum. A constant reminder that for my parents, love was not unconditional, it was a resource distributed according to the potential return on investment they saw in each daughter. And I was clearly not the best investment. The second piece in my collection is perhaps the most bittersweet. It's the story of how the seed of my freedom was planted and how my family, once again, tried to trample on it. My maternal grandmother, Elena, was a woman from another era, strong, pragmatic, and with a gaze that seemed to see through people's facades. She was the only one in the family who never fell under Kenya's spell. While my mother Adela celebrated Kenya's grace, my grandmother would frown and mutter, "Grace is knowing how to stand on your own 2 feet. With me, however, she would watch in silence, with a half-smile of approval when she saw me studying or working on a project. When I was 22 and about to graduate from university, my grandmother passed away. It was a tough blow. At the reading of the will, a sober event at a notary's office, it was revealed that she had left each of her granddaughters a sum of 50,000 Mexican pesos. It wasn't a fortune, but for a recent graduate, it was significant capital. My family's reaction was predictable. Kenya, who was 18 at the time, shrieked with excitement. "I'm going to Europe," she announced before the notary had even finished speaking. And so she did. For 2 months, her social media was flooded with photos in Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. She bought designer clothes, attended music festivals, and returned home without a single peso, but with many anecdotes that once again made her the center of attention at all family gatherings. My parents listened to her, spellbound, saying things like, "It's good that the girl enjoys her youth, that's what money is for." When they asked me what I would do with my share, I hesitated. I had student loans to pay. I needed a more reliable car. But a memory of my grandmother stopped me. A week before she died, she had taken my hand and, with surprising lucidity, whispered to me, "Amelita, money that flies away never returns. Invest in what is ours, my dear, in what endures. Invest in the land, in the talent of our people. No one can ever take that away from you." Taking her advice as a sacred mandate, I looked for opportunities. A friend from university was creating an online platform, a kind of digital marketplace to connect Mexican artisans with international buyers. It was a risky idea, a startup in its infancy, but I believed in it. I believed in the talent of our people. I invested the 50,000 pesos in exchange for a small stake in the company. My parents' reaction was a mix of mockery and disappointment. "But how could you, my father," Fausto said with a frown. "It's like throwing money in the trash. Why didn't you use it for a down payment on a new car or for a nice trip like your sister?" My mother was more subtle. "I expected you to be more sensible, Mija. That's your grandmother's money." For the next few years, every time the company went through difficulties, my father never missed an opportunity to say, "I told you so." They never asked how it was going, they just assumed failure. But I kept believing, and the platform grew slowly at first, and then exponentially. It became a benchmark. My small investment, the one that was money thrown in the trash, multiplied by 10, and then by 20. When I turned 28, I sold my stake. The little trinket business gave me enough capital to make the down payment on my house in Coyoacán, a down payment that covered more than 50% of its value. When I told them, there were no congratulations. There was an uncomfortable silence, followed by a comment from my father. "Wow, you got lucky." It wasn't luck. It was vision. It was faith. It was my grandmother's last gift. That house wasn't just mine, it was ours. It was a tribute to her wisdom. And the fact that my parents, who had mocked the decision that made it possible, now wanted to snatch it from me to give it to the daughter who had squandered her own inheritance on ephemeral pleasures. That wasn't just an injustice, it was a desecration. The calm I had managed to build was, as I now realize, deceptively fragile. The perfect storm began to form with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. It was my mother, Adela, and her voice was laden with a panic I knew all too well, Kenya's manufactured panic. "Amalia, you have to come. It's an emergency," she said, almost breathless. My heart skipped a beat. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" "It's your sister," she replied, and the tone of Greek tragedy told me no one was in mortal danger. "Gail left her. The bastard kicked her out of his apartment. And that's not all. She was also fired from her job." I leaned against my kitchen counter, feeling a migraine begin to form behind my eyes. Gail was Kenya's rich boyfriend of the moment, a junior executive who had been supporting her for the past year. The job was at an art gallery in Polanco, a position my father had gotten for her, which she treated more like a social club than a job. "I'm on my way," I said, though I knew exactly what I would find, Kenya on my parents' sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, her eyes swollen from calculated crying, while my mother fluttered around her with cups of tea and words of comfort. And I was not wrong. The scene was exactly that. My father paced back and forth, ranting against Gail and the gallery's insensitive boss. When Kenya saw me, she let out a sob that sounded more like a complaint than pain. "I've lost everything, Amalia," she moaned. "My home, my job, my future." I spent the next hour listening to a heavily edited version of the events. According to her, Gail was a controlling monster and her boss was envious. The truth, which I learned days later from a mutual friend, was that Gail found her using his American Express card to buy a $1,000 handbag without permission. And at the gallery, she was fired for being late for the umpteenth time and treating an important client poorly. For the next few days, my parents' house became the headquarters for Operation Save Kenya. The atmosphere was dense, suffocating. My sister wandered around in her pajamas all day, sighing dramatically and demanding special meals. My parents treated her like a patient recovering from a terminal illness. I tried to stay on the sidelines, visiting only when necessary, but I felt their gazes on me. I felt the nonverbal conversation, the pressure building. I knew they were looking for a solution, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this solution would somehow involve me. The calm was over. The storm had arrived in the city, and I was directly in its path. A week after Kenya's cataclysm, I received the invitation, or rather, the summons. "My dear, your father and I want you to come for dinner on Saturday," my mother said over the phone. Her voice was sweet, almost syrupy, a tone she always used as a prelude to an impossible request. "We need to talk about an important family matter." My instinct screamed at me to make an excuse, to run away, but a part of me, the part trained for years to be the responsible daughter, forced me to accept. "Of course, Mom. I'll be there." I arrived on Saturday at 7 o'clock sharp. The smell of roasted pork loin filled the house, a scent reserved for special occasions, which set off my alarm bells. Kenya was nowhere in sight, probably in her room, preparing for her grand entrance. My parents greeted me with exaggerated warmth. My father, Fausto, poured me a glass of Winnie, an expensive one. My mother, Adela, couldn't stop complimenting my dress. It was a softening up, a textbook tactic. We sat down at the table. Kenya then appeared, dressed in black, with her makeup intentionally smudged to feign sadness. She sat down without a word, merely sighing from time to time. Dinner proceeded in an atmosphere of palpable tension. My parents talked about trivialities, but their eyes kept darting meaningful glances at me. Finally, with dessert served, my father cleared his throat, signaling the beginning of the trial. "Amalia," he began in the solemn tone of a patriarch, "as you know, your sister is going through the most difficult time of her life." I nodded silently, waiting for the blow. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he continued. "Kenya needs a quiet place, her own space to heal, to find herself. A place without the pressure of us, where she can start over." My mother took over, her voice trembling with false emotion. "A nest, my dear. A safe place." And we thought, what place is safer and more full of love than your house? My fork stopped midway to my mouth. The air grew thick. I looked at Kenya, who at that moment looked up with a perfectly rehearsed expression of an innocent victim. "My house?" I asked, my voice sounding weaker than I had hoped. "Yes," my father said, as if it were the most logical idea in the world. "It's the perfect solution. You're hardly ever there, always working, and the garden would do her a world of good. The art, the atmosphere of Coyoacan. It's just what she needs to get inspired." "Dad, my house is small," I argued, trying to stay calm. "There's barely enough room for me. Besides, I work from home most of the time." "Nonsense," Fausto interrupted, losing his patience. "There's plenty of room. She can use the guest room." "I don't have a guest room," I replied. "It's my studio, where I keep my equipment, my materials." "Well, then you move it," he snapped, ending the discussion. "Amalia, this isn't about your comfort. It's about your sister's need. Family supports each other. It's what we do." "I don't understand," I said, looking at both of them. Are you asking me to let Kenya move into my house indefinitely? We're not asking you, my mother said, her sweet voice turning into a sharp knife. We're telling you it's what needs to be done. It's your duty as an older sister. At that moment, Kenya let out a choked sob. I don't want to be a bother, she said in a broken voice. If you don't want me to, Amalia, I understand. I guess I can live on the street. It was the coup de grace, the perfect manipulation. My parents looked at her with heartbroken expressions, and then at me, with a cold accusation in their eyes. They had surrounded me. It was a perfectly executed ambush. Every word, every gesture had been planned to corner me, to make me feel guilty, selfish, a bad daughter, a bad sister. I felt like an animal trapped in a cage, and the walls were closing in around me. I swallowed hard, searching for the right words, the ones that could defuse the emotional bomb they had just placed on the table. I understand that Kenya needs help, I began cautiously. And I want to help. Maybe I could pay for her first month's rent in a small apartment, help her look for a job. Rent? My father snorted as if I had said something obscene. You think this is solved with money? This is about family, about unconditional support. Your sister doesn't need the charity of rent. She needs a home. She needs yours. The calm broke. I stood my ground. Dad, that house is my home. It's my space, the fruit of my labor. It's not a guest house, I can't just hand it over. It was then that the true nature of their plan was revealed in all its monstrosity. My father leaned over the table, his face red with anger, and uttered the words that would be seared into my brain, the words that would change everything. It's just a house, Amalia. Get it through your head. Give it to your sister. The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't say, share it. He didn't say, lend it. He said, give it. The verb was definitive, absolute. It was an expropriation order. What? What do you mean, give it? I stammered in disbelief. And then the living room door opened. A middle-aged man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase walked into the dining room. I didn't recognize him. Amalia, I'd like you to meet Lawyer Dorantes, my father said with a self-satisfied gesture. He's an old family friend and an excellent lawyer. He's been advising us. Lawyer Dorantes shook my hand, a clammy, soft hand. He sat at the table as if he owned the place. Miss Amalia, he began in an unctuous voice, your parents have explained the delicate situation to me. Legally, although the property is in your name, there is a concept called moral and familial obligation. Given that your parents have provided you with emotional and formative support throughout the years so that you could achieve success, they have a certain moral influence over the assets you've acquired. It was the biggest load of nonsense I had ever heard in my life. It was a veiled threat, an intimidation tactic designed to scare me, to make me believe they had some kind of legal power over my property. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, opening his briefcase, we have prepared a donation document. It's a simple procedure. You cede the property to your sister, Kenya. It's an act of generosity that the law provides for, and I couldn't take it anymore. I shot up from my chair. The chair scraped against the floor. This is insane, I said, my voice trembling with rage. You can't be serious. You expect me to legally gift my house to Kenya? It's for the best for everyone, my mother, Adela, intervened, with tears in her eyes. Think about it, my dear. Kenya will have a home, she'll recover. And you, well, you're strong, you're smart. You can get another house. It's easier for you. That was their logic. My strength was not a quality to be admired, but a resource to be exploited. My success was not mine, it was a safety net for the family. They were punishing me for my competence and rewarding Kenya for her failure. We'll give you a week to think about it, my father said, regaining control. A week to come to your senses and sign the papers. Don't force us to take other measures, Amalia. I didn't ask what those other measures were. I didn't want to know. I left that house without saying goodbye, with the sound of Kenya's sobs and my father's words ringing in my ears. It wasn't a family dinner, it had been a mugging. And they had just declared war on me for the only territory that was truly mine. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Mexico City, my hands clutching the steering wheel, a toxic mix of anger and panic coursing through my veins. The city lights blurred through my tears. Every red light was torture, a moment when the dinner scene replayed in my mind, my father's face, the lawyer's voice, Kenya's victim's smile. I parked at a scenic overlook with a view of the illuminated city. I needed air. I needed a voice of reason in the midst of this hurricane of madness. There was only one person I could call, my Uncle Silvestre. Uncle Silvestre was my father's younger brother, his polar opposite. While Fausto was a pragmatic and authoritarian businessman, Silvestre was a retired architect, a sensitive and observant man who had always seen our family dynamics with painful clarity. He was the only one who, when I was a child, asked about my drawings instead of my grades. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. "Amelita? Are you okay? It's almost 11 at night." His calm voice was enough to make me break down. I told him everything, the words tumbling out, interrupted by sobs of rage. I told him about the dinner, the demand, the lawyer, the threat. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. It wasn't a silence of surprise, but of a deep, weary resignation. I knew this day would come, he finally said, his voice grave. "They always take things too far when it comes to Kenya. Do you think they can do it, Uncle? Take my house legally?" "Of course not," he replied firmly. "That lawyer is a charlatan or an accomplice. Your house is yours. But they don't play on the field of law, Amalia. They play on the field of guilt. They're going to bombard you, isolate you, call you selfish and ungrateful until they break you." Hearing him verbalize my greatest fear was strangely a relief. I wasn't crazy. "I don't know what to do," I confessed, feeling small and helpless. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his tone turning serious and strategic. "What I'm about to tell you is very important. Do you remember your grandmother Elena?" "Of course," I replied, confused. "Your grandmother left you that money so you could be free, so you could build your own world, away from your father's madness and your mother's blindness. She saw your strength when no one else did. Do you think she would want you to surrender the fruit of her faith to subsidize the irresponsibility of others?" The question hit me with the force of a revelation. The image of my grandmother, taking my hand on her deathbed, appeared in my mind. "Invest in what is ours, Mija." "No," I replied, my voice regaining its strength. "No, she wouldn't want that." "Exactly," Uncle Silvestre said. "This isn't a fight for a house, Amalia. It's a fight for your life, for your grandmother's legacy. Don't back down. Don't give an inch. Do what you have to do to protect yourself. And if you need anything, anything at all, call me. I'm on your side. Always." I hung up the phone. The fog of panic had begun to dissipate, replaced by an icy clarity. My uncle was right. This was no longer about pleasing them or maintaining a family peace that had never existed. It was about honoring the only person who had believed in me and, in the process, saving myself. I looked at the city lights. They no longer seemed threatening, they looked like a chessboard. And I, for the first time, was ready to make my move. On Monday morning, I called my mother. I adopted a tone of voice that was a carefully calibrated mix of sadness and defeat. "Mom," I said with a sigh, "I've been thinking about what you said. I need time to process everything. It's a very big decision." "Of course, my dear," she replied, and I could hear the note of triumph in her voice. "Take your time. We know you'll do the right thing." The right thing. That phrase ignited the fire within me, but I maintained my composure. I had bought myself the time I needed. Immediately after hanging up, my real work began. I didn't look for a lawyer to defend me, I looked for one to attack. But my first call wasn't to a law firm, it was to one of the most exclusive real estate agencies in the city. I asked to speak with their best agent. They assigned me Renata, a woman in her 50s, elegant, with a reputation for being a shark in the real estate world. We met that same afternoon at my house. Renata walked through the property with an expert eye, nodding silently. She saw beyond the personal decor, she saw the location, the structure, the potential. "It's a gem, Miss Amalia," she finally said, sitting in my living room. "Are you sure you want to sell?" I told her a summarized, professional version of the story. "Unforeseen family circumstances are forcing me to liquidate the asset quickly. I need a fast, discreet sale." Renata looked at me intently for a moment. She was a woman who read people as well as she read blueprints. "I understand," she said, and in her tone, I knew she understood more than I had said. "A quick sale usually means sacrificing the price. But you might be in luck." She opened her tablet and showed me a map of the area. "There's a very strong rumor," she began, lowering her voice. "A luxury development corporation, Curry and Associados, wants to build a mixed-use complex 2 blocks from here. A massive project, but they have an access problem. They've been quietly buying up properties to secure the main entrance they need for their project." She traced a circle on the map with her finger. My house was right in the center. My heart began to pound. "If the rumors are true," Renata continued, "your house isn't just a house to them. It's the key to a project worth hundreds of millions of pesos. They won't want to negotiate, they'll want to buy it now, and they'll pay a considerable premium to avoid any delays." "How much time is now?" I asked. "If I contact the right person within the corporation and they're as desperate as I think, we could have an offer in 48 hours and close the deal in less than a week. They have legal teams that can expedite the entire notary process. They don't need bank financing. It's a cash transaction." It was perfect. A miracle. Or maybe the universe finally conspiring in my favor. "And the price?" I dared to ask. Renata smiled for the first time, a sharp smile. "You let me do the negotiating, but I can tell you that your property, under these circumstances, is worth no less than 5 million pesos. And I think I can get you that, and maybe a little more." 5 million. The figure floated in the air, almost unreal. It was more than I had ever dreamed of. "Let's do it," I said without a second's hesitation. "Contact those people." I didn't sleep that night. While my family believed I was at home, tormented by guilt, deciding how to hand over my life, I was in my studio scanning documents, gathering the blueprints, the title deed, all the papers Renata had asked for. The master plan had taken shape, bigger and more devastating than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just going to save my house, I was going to turn their weapon of pressure into my golden ticket. I was going to teach them a lesson, not just about me, but about the value of things. I was going to teach them, in the harshest way possible, that my house, my work, and my life were far, far from being just a house. The game was afoot. If you're enjoying this story of how patience turns into power, please give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and leave me a comment telling me from which city in the world you're listening. Every comment and every like helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Thank you very much for your support, and now let's continue with the revenge. The next 5 days were the longest and most schizophrenic of my life. I became an actress, playing the role my family expected of me, while behind the scenes, I orchestrated the final act of my liberation. In the mornings, I'd talk to my mother on the phone. I kept my voice low, full of false anguish. "I'm still thinking, Mom. It's so hard," I would tell her. She would respond with manipulative clichés. "We know your heart is good, my dear. In the end, blood is thicker than water." Every word from her was like fuel for my resolve. During the day, my house transformed into a clandestine operations center. Renata moved with the precision of a general. Just as she predicted, Curry and Associados were desperate. The offer came within 36 hours. 5 million pesos. Closing on Friday. I accepted without a counteroffer. Speed was more valuable than a few extra pesos. The corporation's lawyers were a machine of efficiency. They sent documents by courier, I organized Zoom meetings from my studio, and I signed powers of attorney. Meanwhile, I began the meticulous process of secretly dismantling my life. I started with the intangible. I backed up all my important files to the cloud. I changed the addresses for my bank and utility correspondence to a P.O. box I opened that week. Then I moved on to the physical. Every night, after making sure I wouldn't have unexpected visitors, I packed. Not in obvious moving boxes. I used old suitcases and duffel bags. I began with the most personal things, my grandmother's photo albums, her letters, the small jewelry box she left me. Then the important documents, my university degree, my passport, the receipts for every piece of furniture and improvement I had made to the house. Next, the books. Taking each book from the shelf was like tearing out a part of me, but I did it, wrapping the most precious ones in clothes to protect them. I stacked them at the back of my closet, hidden behind my winter clothes. The hardest part was maintaining the facade with my family. Kenya would send me text messages with links to furniture and decor. "Look, sis, this sofa would be perfect in the living room," she wrote, followed by a heart emoji. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, wanting to type a scathing reply. Instead, I responded with a simple, "It's nice." Every message from her was a reminder of her complete disconnect from reality, of her absolute belief in her own entitlement. It was nauseating. On Thursday night, the day before the deal closed, my father called me. "Amalia, your time is running out," he said, his voice hard, blunt. "I hope you've made the right decision. Lawyer Dorantes has the papers ready for you to sign tomorrow." "I'll make my final decision tomorrow, Dad," I replied, my voice sounding surprisingly calm. "I'll see you all at my house tomorrow at 7 p.m. Everyone come." "Sounds good," he said, clearly interpreting my invitation as a surrender. "We'll bring a bottle of champagne to celebrate the family being united again." "Perfect," I said, a cold smile forming on my face. "Bring the champagne. We're going to need it." I hung up the phone. I looked around. The house already felt empty, hollow. Most of my personal belongings were hidden. Only the large furniture remained, the shell of the life I had built. I sat on the living room floor in the silence. I didn't feel fear, I didn't feel sadness. I only felt a strange calm, the calm that precedes an impact. The charade was about to end. The curtain was about to rise for the final act. Friday was a day of precise, almost choreographed movements. At 10 a.m., I met with Renata and the legal representative of Curry and Associados at the notary's office. The process was impersonal and swift. I signed a stack of documents. My hand didn't tremble. I watched as they made the electronic transfer to my account. On the notary's computer screen, I saw the digits appear, 5 million Mexican pesos. It was real. I no longer owned the house. I owned my future. I gave Renata a copy of the key and thanked her. "The pleasure was all mine," she said, shaking my hand. "Good luck in your new life, Miss Amalia. You deserve it." I spent the rest of the day making the final preparations. I contacted a moving company to pick up my furniture first thing on Saturday morning, destined for a storage unit I had rented. I left clear instructions and an advance payment. I wouldn't be there. By the time they arrived, I would be far away. Then I went to the bank, withdrew a small amount of cash, and transferred the bulk of the 5 million to an investment account at another bank, one with which my family had no connection. It was a security measure, a way to cut off any possible trail. At 6 p.m., I returned to the house for the last time. It was strangely serene. I walked through each room, saying goodbye not to the walls, but to the memories. The mark on the wall where I hung my first diploma, the corner of the garden where my grandmother and I once planted a lemon tree, the piece of tile that broke when I tried to install a shelf. I set the stage for the final confrontation. On the living room coffee table, the same table I had restored with so much love, I placed a single object, a wine-colored leather folder. Inside were not the donation papers they were expecting. It was a certified copy of the sales contract and the proof of the bank transfer. I took a long shower. I chose my outfit carefully, impeccably tailored black trousers and an ivory silk blouse. It was an outfit that radiated power and control. I put on makeup not to hide, but to accentuate. I wanted them to see me as strong, not as a victim. At 6:55 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and opened the door. There they were, my father, Fausto, with a triumphant smile and a bottle of Moët and Chandon in his hand, my mother, Adela, with an expression of maternal relief, and behind them, Kenya, with a radiant smile, already on the phone, probably describing her new house to a friend. Beside them stood Lawyer Dorantes with his briefcase full of useless papers. "Ah, my daughter," my father exclaimed, coming in and giving me a hug that felt fake. "I knew you'd come to your senses. Tonight, we celebrate." "Come in," I said, my voice calm, my face a mask of neutrality. "I've been expecting you." They walked into the living room, admiring the place as if it were already theirs. Kenya was already eyeing a wall. "I'm going to put an 80-inch screen here," she said aloud. They sat on my sofa, in my chairs. The lawyer placed his briefcase on the table next to my folder. The air was thick with their victory. They had no idea of the ambush that awaited them. The trap wasn't for me. The trap was always for them. "Well, Amalia, let's not beat around the bush," my father said, rubbing his hands together. "We're glad you've come to understand. Lawyer Dorantes has the documents here to formalize the donation. A few signatures and we're done." The lawyer opened his briefcase with a pompous gesture and took out a stack of papers. "As you'll see, miss, everything is in order. A simple procedure to ensure your sister's well-being." Kenya was smiling, looking at her nails. My mother looked at me with teary eyes, as if she were witnessing an act of sainthood. I remained standing. I didn't sit down. I wanted to maintain the position of power. "Before I look at your papers, lawyer," I said, my voice cutting through the festive air, "I'd like you to look at mine." I took the wine-colored leather folder from the table and opened it. I took out the first document and placed it in front of my father. It was the copy of the sales contract. His eyes scanned the first few lines. His smile froze and then vanished, replaced by utter confusion. "What is this?" he asked, frowning. "Curry and Associados. What kind of joke is this, Amalia?" "It's no joke," I replied, my voice firm, without a hint of emotion. I took out the second document, the proof of the electronic transfer, and placed it on top of the first. "This house, the house you're standing in, was sold this morning at 10 o'clock. The new owner is the Curry and Associados Corporation. The sale price was 5 million pesos, which have already been deposited into my personal account." The silence that fell over the room was so absolute I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My family's faces went from arrogance to disbelief in an instant. Kenya dropped her phone on the floor. My mother put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide as saucers. Lawyer Dorantes looked like a fish out of water, opening and closing his mouth without making a sound. My father was the first to react. He jumped to his feet, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "You're lying," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "It's a trick. You can't sell the house without our permission." "Your permission?" I laughed, a short, joyless laugh. The house was in my name. I am a legal and financially independent adult. I don't need your permission for anything. Then I pulled out my secret weapon. I turned on a small voice recorder I had left on the bookshelf. My father's voice, recorded during the dinner on Saturday, filled the room, clear and resonant. It's just a house, Amalia. Get it through your head. Give it to your sister. I turned off the recording. You were right, Dad. It is just a house. And since it was just a house, I decided to turn it into something more useful, like my financial freedom. You tricked us, my mother stammered. No. You tried to rob me. I was just smarter. It was then that I delivered the final blow, the last detail of my revenge. And by the way, I said, looking them straight in the eye, savoring every second of their collapse, I took the liberty of doing a little research. The reason Curry and Associados paid so much and so quickly is because this property is the key to the main access for their new luxury complex, a project that will inevitably require a rezoning of the entire area. I paused, letting the words sink in. Which means, Dad, Mom, that your house, the family home which is just 3 blocks from here, is now in an unfavorable position. With the new building regulations, its value has just plummeted. You could have sold too, maybe for a fortune, but you were too busy trying to steal just a house from me. My father's face crumbled. The anger was replaced by pure horror as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. They hadn't just lost my house, they had sabotaged their own financial future. You're a monster. Kenya finally screamed, finding her voice, a voice full of venom and tears of frustration. You ruined my life. No, Kenya, I replied, looking at her coldly. I didn't ruin your life. I gave it back to you. Now, for the first time, it's all yours. Let's see what you do with it. I turned and walked to the door. The new owners will take possession tomorrow at noon. I suggest you leave. You have no business being on private property anymore. I opened the door and stood there, waiting. The curtain had fallen. The show was over. And I was the only one left standing on the stage. The scene that followed was the epitome of chaos. Lawyer Dorantes, realizing his participation in this theater of the absurd had ended in the worst possible way, was the first to flee. He picked up his briefcase and, mumbling an incoherent apology, scurried out the door like a rat abandoning a sinking ship. Kenya, for her part, had a complete hysterical breakdown. She threw herself onto the Sofami sofa, for a few more hours and began to cry and scream. I hate you. I've always hated you. You've always been selfish, jealous of me. Her accusations were so predictable they almost made me pity her. It was like watching a child who has had her favorite toy taken away, unable to comprehend that the toy was never hers to begin with. My mother, Adela, ran to her, trying to comfort her, shooting me looks that mixed hatred and pleading. Look what you've done, Amalia. Look at your sister. Are you happy now? Does destroying your own family make you happy? But the most fascinating transformation was my father's. The authoritarian man, the patriarch who was always in control, had crumbled. He stood in the middle of the living room, pale, the bottle of champagne still in his hand, like a soldier who hasn't realized the war is over and he has lost. He looked around at the walls, at the furniture, not as if he were seeing a house, but the ruins of his own Empyrean empire built on control and manipulation that I had just demolished with a single signature. His arrogance had evaporated, leaving only an old, defeated man. Leave, I repeated, my voice now stronger, with no room for negotiation. Now. Fausto seemed to awaken from his trance. He looked at the bottle in his hand as if he had just discovered it. With a gesture of impotent frustration, he dropped it onto the rug. It didn't break, but the dull thud was like the final period on our relationship. He helped my mother lift a sobbing Kenya. As they dragged her towards the door, my father stopped and looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a disconcerting emptiness. "I will never forgive you," he whispered in a hoarse voice. "I didn't ask for your forgiveness," I replied, holding his gaze. "I only asked for your respect. And since you wouldn't give it to me, I bought it for myself." I closed the door behind them. The click of the lock was the most liberating sound I had ever heard. I leaned against the wood, and for the first time all night, my legs trembled. The tears I had held back burst forth, but they were not tears of sadness, they were of relief, of a tension built up over 30 years that was finally being released. I cried for the girl who had a 15th birthday party in the kitchen. I cried for the young woman who was ridiculed for investing in her dreams. I cried for the woman who had to plan a war just to have peace. When the tears stopped, a deep silence filled the house. A silence that was no longer mine, but one that I had caused. I walked through the empty living room, picked up the bottle of champagne from the floor, and took it to the kitchen. I opened it. The cork shot out, hitting the ceiling. I poured a glass into one of the ceramic cups I hadn't packed yet. I stood by the window overlooking the garden and raised the cup in a silent toast. I toasted to my grandmother. I toasted to my uncle Silvestre. And finally, I toasted to Miselfto, the woman who had entered that house seeking a refuge and who was now leaving it as a conqueror. The battle was over. I had won. The next morning, while the moving truck emptied the remnants of my past life, I was already on a plane. I didn't stay to watch the end. I didn't need to. My destination was a small boutique hotel on the coast of Oaxaca, a place I had wanted to visit for years. I needed the sea, the sun, and the distance to process the cataclysm I had caused. I spent 2 weeks there in a state of blessed disconnection. I turned off my personal phone, communicating only through my work laptop and a new number that only my uncle Silvestre had. I woke up without alarms, walked on the beach, ate at local markets, and talked with the artisans I admired so much. It was a reset, a purging of the emotional poison I had carried inside for so long. When I returned to Mexico City, I didn't go back to Coyoacán. I had rented a modern, bright apartment in the Roma neighborhood, a place that vibrated with a new, cosmopolitan energy. It was smaller than my house, but the views from the 10th floor balcony were spectacular. It was a landscape of new beginnings. With a portion of the 5 million, I fulfilled the dream that had been born from my grandmother's investment. I founded my own consultancy, Rai's Digital Route. I was no longer just a freelancer, I was an entrepreneur. I hired a small team of talented young people, and we dedicated ourselves to bringing Mexican folk art to a global scale. The success was almost immediate. The story behind the company's founding, a story of heritage, vision, and empowerment, resonated with the media. I was interviewed by business magazines and entrepreneurship blogs. I became, ironically, everything my parents valued, a visible, public success story. But it was a success built on my own terms, not theirs. I blocked the phone numbers of my parents, Kenya, and the entire network of aunts and cousins who tried to contact me to lecture me or ask for money. The flying monkeys, as my uncle called them, were silenced with a single click. My uncle Silvestre became my anchor. We had dinner once a week. It was he who kept me updated, in small, manageable doses, on the aftermath of the explosion. He told me that my parents were indeed unable to sell their house for the price they wanted. The Curry and Associados development had limited their options. They were trapped in a devalued property, a constant reminder of their greed. It was also he who told me about Kenya. Without the family safety net, reality had hit her brutally. After a few months of living off the charity of her friends, she had to take a job as a sales associate in a department store at a mall. It was not the glamorous life she had envisioned. I heard this news without joy, but also without guilt. They were the natural consequences of their own decisions. I hadn't written their destiny, I had simply handed them back the pen to write their own. My life, meanwhile, flourished. I made new friends, started dating someone, traveled. I discovered that without the dead weight of my family's expectations, I could fly. A year after the day of the sale, I received an email from an unknown sender. It was my mother. It was brief. It said that my father had had health problems, that things were difficult, and that she thought of me every day. It ended with one sentence: "I hope one day you can forgive us." I read the email several times. There was no request for money, no obvious attempt at manipulation. It seemed sincere. For a moment, I felt a pang of the old guilt, the echo of the daughter program to take care of everyone. But then I looked around me. I was in my office, the office of my own company. On the wall hung a huge Oaxacan hupel, a gift from a women's cooperative we had helped to triple their income. My life was full, it was mine. I deleted the email. Maybe one day I could forgive them, but not today. Forgiveness didn't mean putting my neck back on the guillotine. They say I destroyed my family, but I believe I only exposed the cracks that already existed. I lost a family, yes, but I found myself. I found my worth. And I built a new family based on mutual respect and genuine support. So now I leave the question to you. Was I the bad guy? Thank you for reaching the end of Amelia's story. If it moved you, made you angry, or inspired you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories. Your support is crucial for us to continue creating content. Thank you very much, and see you next time.